Be'ezat Hashem. Today in the Shabbat, we're going to be learning Membet Amud Bet. We're starting the very bottom of Membet Amud Aleph. We're going to have 4 sections in today's learning. Be'ezat Hashem. First, we're going to learn about adding spices to a kli rishon or a kli sheini, and we'll see the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that there's a chiluk if you have spicy foods. Okay, if you have spicy or acidic foods, it makes a chiluk about adding spices to it. Very interesting. The second section, exactly. The second, we're going to talk about melach, salt. Salt, is it begeder tavlin or like other food? Also a discussion. 3, we're going to discuss, this gets it now, completely new topic of muktzeh. We're going to talk about muktzeh, how it deals with moving a mutter item, letzoach, and a muktzeh item. We're going to see also that's a discussion. And then the final discussion we'll speak about is the position of Rabba, how he understands Rav Chisda, which is one of the ways to understand the Mishnah. Be'ezat Hashem, we're starting at the Mishnah, bottom and bet Amud Aleph, Hayil Fas, and this is a new Mishnah, Baruch Hashem. So yesterday, we really finished off discussing that there was, the psak we came out with yesterday, let's just say it like that, is that Beit Hillel, according to the Tanakama of the Mishnah, understood you're allowed to add cold water to a kli sheini that's hot. That's what we came out.
Cold water
to a kli sheini that's hot. Yes. That's what we spoke about yesterday. That's how Rabba Paskin, that's what you just did, right? Kli sheini. Now this Mishnah talks about adding spices. Okay?
Spices.
Tavlin, spices.
Oh,
so you have 2 options.
I want to give you a kiss.
Yochai,
because
me too.
It's so applicable.
I just was talking about. We have a new offer for you. We're going to speak about it after.
You know, we're talking about things.
Abishma, what's the story here? So you have pot on the fire. Okay, let's go through the steps again. Pot is on the fire. Okay, I'm very clear. I want to make a chiluk between liquids and solids because there's also nafkamina here, and I'm not going to paskin halacha, but just that we're aware of the chiluk. Pot is on the fire. You have soup, chicken soup boiling on the fire. What's that called? Kli rishon, for sure. Kli rishon on the fire. You take it off the fire and it's still yad soledet bo. It's still kli rishon. You pour it into a bowl. That's kli sheini. Right. By the way, Yochai pointed out something smart yesterday. I mean, every day it's something smart, but dafka, if you use a ladle and then you put it into the bowl, yes, it could be that that bowl is actually kli shlishi. By the way, just to point out, it's possible because the ladle might constitute kli sheini. It is possible.
Like we're doing now.
It's not so simple, but it is possible because some hold that the ladle itself, if it's so hot and it goes into the pot and you leave it inside, it actually still is like kli rishon, and the bowl is only kli sheini.
Like
I don't want to get into it today. It's too much to discuss for today. But Bekitzer, let's just keep things straight. You have the pot on the fire, it's kli rishon. You take it off the fire, if it's still yad soledet bo, it's still kli rishon. You put it into another container, now it's kli sheini. You want to add spices to either the original pot or the second pot. What's the halacha? Now, this is going to be a machloket, we'll see in the Mishnah.
Spices,
but we are only discussing, I want to point out, liquids. Okay? Liquids.
It's
a soup, I specifically
taste.
said soup. Solid, something that's a solid item, yesh omrim, and this is a discussion Mishnah Berurah seems to paskin, we're more machmir, because solid items take longer to lose their heat. They maintain their heat. It's like contained inside
solid
for longer. If it's a thick cholent. A thick cholent, so the problem is, the whole logic is it diminishes heat as it goes to the kli sheini.
Preserve the heat.
But if the thick item maintains its heat, it could be considered a kli rishon even in the kli sheini. So maybe you're not allowed to add spices to that even in the kli sheini because it's like a kli rishon still. You hear the chiluk I just made? We're not going to get too much into that, but just to be aware, maybe when we get to the halacha, we'll speak about it. But let's just stick, we're talking about soup. Chicken soup on the fire to add spices. Now, you can't add while it's on the fire, that's for sure. But let's say you take it off the fire, it's still a kli rishon. Or to pour it into another bowl and add to that. That's what we're going to discuss really as we start.
But it's not on the fire anymore.
Correct, but it's still kli rishon. Exactly. As long as it's yad soledet bo, it's still kli rishon. Says the Mishnah, ha'il fas. Number 1 is the frying pan. Vaktera, or a pot, you're boiling something. It's liquids. She'eviran merutachin, you removed it from the fire while it was still boiling. Okay? Lo yitein letochan tavlin. You're not allowed to put spices inside of them.
What is
Now,
it? Fast?
fas is a frying pan. Frying pan.
Okay.
Frying pan. Now, Rashi explains here, you removed it during Ben Hashmashot. You're not allowed to add spices even when it gets dark. Rashi specifically says Ben Hashmashot, the Meforshim explain over here, because theoretically, during Ben Hashmashot, you may be allowed to add. It's saying, if you remove it during Ben Hashmashot, you're not allowed to add after, in the night. During Ben Hashmashot, since what we're dealing with here is perhaps only in Isur D'Rabbanan, you might be allowed to add during Ben Hashmashot. But anyways, the point is, to add to a Kli Rishon on Shabbat, you're not allowed. No, you're not. Oh, so you're not allowed. Why? There's a bishul element associated. L'chaora, this is a bishul element. Membet Amud bet. Aval notenhu letocha ke'ara letocha tamchui. But you could add spices if you poured the soup from the chicken soup pot into a ke'ara, into a bowl, or a tamchui. Rashi says tamchui is a serving dish, meaning you took the cholent off the fire. Sorry, let's just stay with the soup. You took the soup off the fire, you poured it into a big serving dish, and you brought that to the table. You take from the tamchui, you put in the bowls. But the point is, it was transferred kli sheini. So therefore, you could put spices in the kli sheini, says the Mishnah. Fine. Why? Because kli sheini is not mevashel. That's the stam assumption over here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, now Rabbi Yehuda says, lakol hu noten, you're allowed to put spices in everything, chutz midavar sheyesh bo chometz v'tzir, unless it's a food that has vinegar or tzir. Tzir is fish brine. What's fish brine? So Rashi says, tzir is hanotef min adagim kishekovshin oto b'mechabesh, is that they would grind up the fish or squeeze the fish, and a certain fish brine would come out. Fish brine, it's like an acidic, almost like pickle juice. I think that's the way I understand it. It's like, it's chometz is vinegar. Tzir is fish brine. It's a mashu very acidic.
Tzir is also can be from meat.
Correct, but this is
the water with the fat.
This is dafka fish brine. Maze fish brine. It's very acidic.
Okay.
Acidic. It's
like
very sharp.
Like the water of the herring.
Like herring or like pickles. Like very sharp, very acidic. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, let's just get clear what the words are, because there's going to be two ways to understand. Rabbi Yehuda says, you can add spices to everything. He's being cholek on Tanakama. Again, Tanakama says, you can't add spices to the Kli Rishon. Obviously, we're talking about off the fire, just to be clear. But you could add spices to Kli Sheini. Fine. Rabbi Yehuda says, you can add spices to anything besides something that's spicy, that's sharp. Something that has tzir or chometz. The Gemara has two options to understand Rabbi Yehuda. Either Rabbi Yehuda is being cholek on Kli Rishon, or he's being cholek on Kli Sheini. Now, how do we understand? So, if he's being cholek on Kli Rishon, then what is he saying? You could add to a Kli Rishon, unless it's spicy, unless it has chometz or tzir, which means he would be cholek lekula. He's actually saying you could add spices to a Kli Rishon, again off the fire, unless it's a spicy food, because spices cause it to heat up faster, to heat up more. That's one way to understand him.
Salt.
Salt we'll get to in the Gemara. The other way to understand him is he's being cholek la'achmir. He's saying, no, you can't add to a
Kli
sheini, meaning you could only add to a Kli sheini if it doesn't have tzir or chometz. Tanakama holds you, bichlal you could add to a Kli sheini. Rabbi Yehuda is saying you could add to a Kli sheini, but if it has tzir or chometz, you're not allowed to, which is actually being lahachmir. But here there's two ways, either a kula on Kli Rishon or a chumra on Kli Sheini.
That's what Rashi said.
So let's Ibailu. The Gemara immediately asks, let's understand the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, arei shakai, ulekula. Let's speak it out. Either he's arguing on the Reisha, the Tanakama said you can't add spices to Kli Rishon. On that, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, you could add spices to Kli Rishon unless it's tzir or chometz. So that's a kula. No, that's the sheila. That's the question.
But that's for sure.
Option number one. Option off the fire. Ulekula. And then it comes out that he's being mekil. Odilma asefakai. He's arguing on the case of Kli Sheini. Ulechumra. Means what's he saying then? He's saying, Tanakama, you're saying you could add spices to any Kli Sheini. You can't add spices, says Rabbi Yehuda, if there's tzir or chometz, even in Kli Sheini. Two ways to understand Rabbi Yehuda. And again, the logic here is that the spicy food, the acidic food, it does more of a bishul than if it's not spicy. Fine. So Tashma, the Gemara says, let's bring a proof. There's a Braita that clearly says that he's talking about Kli Rishon u'lekula. The Tanya, as the Braita says, Rav Yehuda Omer, lekol ilfasin u'noten, you're allowed to add spices to any ilfas. And what is ilfas?
Frying pan.
Which is the
Kli Rishon.
Kli Rishon. Off the fire, of course, but Kli Rishon. You're allowed to add spices to the Kli Rishon. Lekol hakterot rotchot u'noten, you're allowed to add to any hot pots. Chutz midavar sheyesh bo chometz v'tzir. So clearly, what is he saying? Am cholek lekula. You're saying, Tanakama, you can't add spices to any Kli Rishon. On that, says Rabbi Yehuda, you could. I'm not worried about the bishul when it comes to spices. Why? Because spices don't really cook. There's no bishul with spices. The only time there would be a bishul with the spices is if there was tzir or chometz. That would be the problem. So now what comes out is, lefizeh, we have machloket by Kli Rishon. You took the soup off the fire. Boiling soup now, so that's a Kli Rishon. According to the Tanakama, it's sort to add spices to that because it does bishul. If you poured into a second pot, you could add spices to that. It's Kli Sheini. But on Kli Rishon, Rabbi Yehuda says, I hold, you can add spices to that unless it's a acidic food.
But you know, from this Mishnah that we brought about Rabbi Yehuda, one thing is I tell you for sure, on a gderot rotchot, it doesn't mean Kli Rishon. Could be they move it to a different gdera, and it's still roteach.
That's a Kli Sheini, though. That's a Kli Sheini.
I'm saying it could be that it's
Begeder, that's Begeder Kli Sheini. That's what we just said.
If you said
the Braita says clearly.
Sure,
the Braita says clear. Yeah, usually you're talking about that.
Okay, so it seems like Rabbi
It's the terminology. So that's what the Braita says. You say, if you see the Braita says clearly cholek and Kli Rishon, and that's the come out. Now, Tachlis. What's that?
What are they giving? That's the question. Maybe true, it's Kli Rishon, but Ma'u noten Kli Rishon.
So he holds spices doesn't really have bishul.
So we're talking about spices?
That's what he's saying. Dafka, we're talking about spices.
If that's the case, it's really
we're talking about spices. Exactly.
Did he specify what spices?
Doesn't say. Could be paprika.
But he specify what something is spicy or this fish.
That's the only thing he says. If the food itself is spicy or not, or acidic or not.
If there's acidic food,
you're not allowed to
they said no, not spicy. But here it seems like he really cholek on Tanakama.
Exactly.
Usually,
it's okay to
usually Rabbi Yehuda is more machmir, so it doesn't make any sense.
No, not necessarily. You're saying in Ilchot Shabbat, you're saying he's more. We find he's more.
He's usually more machmir.
We're gonna get to later. It's true. We found him kula before. Where was the kula we had before? No.
The kula what?
We had a kula of Rabbi Yehuda before. It was cholek and Tanakama.
He was on the Rabbi Shimon was machmir. Rabbi Yehuda was mikir.
Where do we find before he was cholek and Tanakama in the Mishnah, and he was mekil? Does anybody remember?
Yeah.
Remember we said
it was with Rabbi Meir and Hananya.
I don't think so. Oh, that's true. You're right. Actually, that's true. We said
Hananya said
lechatchila he was more mekil. That's true. Whereas another example of something else. Remember we spoke about in Bameh Madlikin if they would set up an egg that would drip the oil into the lights. That case, Rabbi Yehuda was the mekil. He was the mekil of that case. He was the mekil. He said you're allowed to. You're right. You're allowed to set it up before Shabbat like that. I believe he said you were the mekil. Of course, it's hard to remember everything. Very hard to remember everything. Of course. He was the mekil there. Anyways, okay, let's go ahead. Anyways, B'kitzu we have that machloket by Kli Rishon. B'zat Hashem. Let's continue. Now let's talk about salt. Okay. Savar Rav Yosef Lameimar. Rav Yosef thought to say, Melach hareu kitavlin. So Rav Yosef thought that salt is like spices. Now, what do you mean like spices? Debekli Rishon bashla.
We moved on from this?
That's it, new point.
So Rabbi Yehuda cholek on Tanakama.
Rabbi Yehuda's cholek on Tanakama. He holds you can add tavlin to Kli Rishon unless the Kli Rishon is chometz or tzir, something like that.
Okay.
Exactly. Savar Rav Yosef Lameimar. Now we're going to have three shitot about salt. Melach hareu kitavlin. Salt is like spices. De bekli rishon bashla, or bekli sheni lo bashla. So it means you can't add salt to a kli rishon, again off the fire, because it would cook. Kli sheni, it's not mevashel, and therefore you can add salt to the kli sheni. What?
Salt in water.
Yeah.
If you want them to boil faster, you put salt. In general.
Okay. Sounds good to me.
Try it once and you will see.
I didn't know.
מלח מאיץ את התהליך.
So that's what Rav Yosef thought to say. It's the same halacha. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said to his Rabbi Rav Yosef, 1 second, Rebbe, Tani Rabbi Chia taught in a Braita, Melach eina ketavlin. Melach eina ketavlin. Now what does it mean? Salt is not like spices.
But it depends by the situation.
Now, what does it mean? Hold on. What does it mean it's not like spices? So Abaye understood lachmir. Lachmir. What does it mean lachmir? It doesn't have the kula of spices. It's worse than spices.
As we said.
What does it mean? Let's read.
Adding the more.
Maybe that's the pshat. The bekli sheini nami boshla. Meaning is when it comes to spices, Abai thought like this. Rabbi Chia, what did he mean in the Braita? He meant that kli sheini, we talk about tavlin, we said Tanakama holds mutar. It's not bishul. For tavlin. And that Rabbi Chia, the way we're understanding tavlin, what does it mean? You can't even add salt to a kli sheini because boshla. Maybe it's because what you're saying, but salt is something that cooks very easily.
So you cannot add.
Like kalea bishul, there's a concept we speak about. There's certain things that are cooked very easily, and you can't even add it to kli sheini. That's what Abai. So he's cholek on his Rebbe. Rav Yosef comes out to say that you can't. 1 second. That melach is like tavlin. You can't add to kli rishon. You could add to kli sheini. Abai understands that Rabbi Chia in the Braita is saying, we're going to see there's 2 girsot of this, the first version, that he actually holds, you can't even add it to kli sheini because salt is more chamur than tavlin. Upliga de Rav Nachman. However, both of these shitot, Rav Yosef and Abaye, argue on Rav Nachman. The Amar Rav Nachman, because we have the third shita of Nachman who says, Tzricha milcha bishula, that salt needs bishul, kebisra de tura. Tura is shor. Salt needs cooking like the meat of a shor. The meat of a shor is very tough. It's very hard.
Again.
The melach tzarich bishul kebasar shel shor. What does it mean? What does it mean? It means that the salt of a shor is very rough. It's very tough.
And
it needs intense, long cooking. So the same thing with salt. What does it mean? It means even adding it to a kli rishon would be mutar because it's not mevashel. It means salt is a very, it's not a cookable ingredient.
It's different salt than what we know.
So 1 second. It's a very non-cookable ingredient. And what that means is that you can even add salt according to Rav Nachman, the way we're understanding, even to a kli rishon because it's not going to accomplish bishul, not on the fire. Rashi points out, mishe'aviru min ha'or. On the fire, nobody holds his mutar. But once you take it off the fire, Rav Nachman holds, it doesn't do bishul, and you could still add salt to a kli rishon. So in the first way we learn now, there's 3 shitot. We have Rav Nachman, who's the most machmir. He says, most mekil, excuse me. He's the most lenient. Rav Nachman says you can even add salt to a kli rishon off the fire. We have of Yosef, who says the middle ground. He says that you can add salt to a kli sheini, not to a kli rishon, just like tavlin. And Abaye, who's the most machmir, he says actually salt
most lenient,
most machmir. He says that it's machmir, like the way he understands Rabbi Chia in the Braita is you can't even add salt to a kli sheini.
But who said it's a salt like the basar shel hashor?
That's Rav Nachman.
He's the most mekel.
He is the most mekel.
There's no way you can cook salt on a kli rishon even.
Means you could put salt in a kli rishon.
No problem.
מותר לשים, meaning זה לא מבשל, זה לא מבשל. That comes out 3 shitot. Rav Yosef's the middle. He says it's like tavlin. You can put it in sheini, not in kli rishon.
Who is the most lenient?
Abaye says the pshat Rav Chia when he says that melach is not like tavlin is most machmir. You can't even put it in kli sheini because it's even mevashel kli sheini. What's the logic in that? It's like kalea b'shul.
So what about kli shlishi?
So this brings. Let's finish the Gemara, but then I want to tell you about kli shlishi in a second.
It's okay.
Very interesting.
To everybody.
Now there's another version. Pay attention, good. Don't get confused by this. There's another version of this discussion. Again, Rav Yosef's the same. Saba Rav Yosef lemeimar melach hayo kitavlin de bekli rishon boshla bekli sheini lo boshla. So Rav Yosef's the same. Is that you could put it in kli sheini, you're not allowed to put it in kli rishon. Abaye said, Tani Rabbi Chia taught in a Braita, melach eina kitavlin. But now look at this. He understood actually, eina kitavlin is lekula. That's how Abaye understood lefi this girsa. Is actually lekula. which means you could even
זה
put
לא מטבלין.
melach in kli rishon. That's how Abaye understood. Now, one second. So it means enake tavlin. Tavlin, you're not allowed to put in kli rishon. Abaye understood. Rav Chisda now is saying melach enake tavlin is that you could even put salt in a kli rishon. The kli rishon nami boshla.
So what's the difference?
V'hainu the amar of Nachman, and then it comes out that Abaye's havana of Rav Chisda is the same as Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman says tzricha melcha bishula kibisra de Torah. So now it comes out.
Rav
This is only two
Nachman.
opinions. Exactly means Rav Yosef holds that it's like spices that you can't put only in a kli rishon, but Abaye, Rav Chisda, Rav Nachman, all those shitot told you could put salt even in a kli rishon. That's what comes out. Now, tachlis, I'm not going to get too technical in the halacha here, but as I said, first of all, when this is all talking about liquids, when we're talking about solids, they maintain heat longer. So perhaps even when you pour the
Liquids
solid,
aren't maintaining
the liquid
heat.
loses the heat quicker.
Yeah.
The solid, since it's connected, so it loses heat slower. And there are shitot to hold that if you take a solid food out of a kli rishon, it's still considered a kli rishon.
If you take solid food out of kli rishon, it's still kli rishon.
And memela, based on that, some people are machmir on Shabbat. What they do is when they take, let's say, a hot cholent, if it's a thick cholent, depends how you make it. If it's very thin, it might be like a soup. But if it's thick, they're makbid that you don't put that cholent on a plate that has other food. They'll put it in a separate bowl. Why they put it in a separate bowl? Because that cholent is not a cliche.
But it's in kli shlishi already.
That's the point. But that cholent would not. I hear what you're saying. But it maintains its kli rishon status because it's a solid food. There are shitot to say this, so you shouldn't cook the other foods.
But
that's
one
thing.
In general, you take the crock pot.
Yeah.
You pour it to kli sheni.
Correct.
And when you pour it to the kli sheni, you take from the kli sheni to your plate.
Correct. I hear. That's a kli shlishi. Good. So it could be with solids. It's more of an issue. Now the other thing is what you just said. I don't know. We have to look that up. But the other thing which you just mentioned is tachlis. Usually the rule will be kli shlishi is bichlal mutar. Bichlal mutar. At least lagabi liquids like we're talking about. Bichlal it would be to avoid these issues. There were examples we spoke about where the Gemara seemed to say, Mishnayot, the Gemara we spoke about, seemed to say even kli sheini is enough. So we said oil, we said water, we said, and this spices. Perhaps these types of things would even be mutar in a kli sheini as we came out. But for other foods, we don't know. Maybe they even cook in a kli sheini, so we're machmir to use a kli shlishi. Usually that's what we do. On Shabbat, when you make tea, you pour it in a cup and then you pour it in a second cup. So we're makbid to use a kli shlishi to avoid this issue. There are foods though that we spoke about that perhaps even a kli sheini would be enough. Water, spices, oil, we said all these examples. But like we said, kli shlishi is that's what we're makbid to do on Shabbat. We're starting the new Mishnah right now.
But
okay, yeah.
According to what you say,
yeah,
in some items they preserve the heat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but what happened if I take kli rishon and I meniach al gabe karka or on the What
does meniach al gabe karka have to do with anything? That's a different issue.
It's already there. Like basically you mevatel the.
זה לא קשור. מניח על גבי קרקע זה לא קשור לעניין בישול.
Now I'm taking from the
זה קשור לעניין חזרה.
אבל אין בישול אחר בישול anyway. So if I take it for a second kli already, בכלי שני, it's still מבשל.
Oh, very good. So I did see somebody brought down that there's a difference between the salt that we have today and the salt that they had back in the day. So Art School was doing a write-up on this. They were saying that today it's not as much of a problem because the salt back in the day, it was more solid salt that they dug it out or whatever. But today the salt we have is cooked already. It's already cooked. It's processed. And if you say in bishul achar bishul,
it's like coffee. There isn't. You don't
so
really
then you shouldn't have as much of an issue on our salt
because
today.
רואים למעשה, תכלס,
right.
שאתה יושב על שולחן, they put a really boiling cholent, you put a spoon, and it's very hot, and people put salt, no problem.
Right. That's it seems to be, exactly.
You take it from the crock pot.
או זה כלי שלישי כבר.
נכון, זה בדיוק מה שאמרתי לו.
Right.
אני לא רוצה להגיד מה אני זה, כי אני באמת לא רוצה להגיד הלכה, עזוב.
כן.
נלמד את ההלכה ואז אני
בסדר, אבל לא יודע הלכה,
שלישי.
בעזרת השם.
נלמד את ההלכה, אני לא רוצה להגיד דברים.
Yeah. No, but it does seem it would be מותר. It does seem it would be מותר.
כן, זה לא רוצה להגיד את זה אפילו.
כן. It does seem to be.
עדיף לא להגיד כלום עד שאנחנו לא רואים תחת.
But we'll see it inside. בעזרת השם, we'll see it
מותר
inside.
להתקלח ביום חמם, אפילו לאשכנזים. רבי משה פיינשטיין.
יאללה, let's go. Says the Mishnah.
אתה יכול להגיד את זה.
Now we're going to speak about muktzeh, חבר'ה. We're speaking about muktzeh, okay? Now muktzeh, this is a totally new topic over here. Big topic we're about to discuss.
שמחה גורה.
מה זה muktzeh? So just to get a picture over here, we have things on Shabbat that are called muktzeh, and we have things on Shabbat that are called mukhan. What's the difference between them? Muktzeh means it's set aside from using it on Shabbat. Means you're not allowed to use it, you're not allowed to move it necessarily. Mukhan means things that are allowed to be used on Shabbat. They're prepared for use on Shabbat. Now, what is the idea? We know there's things that are asur d'oraita. Certainly, there's 39 melachot. But the Chachamim came along. Let's just understand it's d'Rabbanan, and they said there's certain items that you're not even allowed to consume, to eat, or to move on Shabbat. Now, why they said those items are muktzeh? So there's different explanations in the rishonim. Either the pshat is they wanted to create an avirav Shabbat, or perhaps because those are items that if you touch them, you might do an isur d'oraita. So there's certain reasons the Chachamim came along and established muktzeh. There's many different categories of muktzeh. But the bottom line is, muktzeh are things that you're not allowed to move, they're not allowed to engage with on Shabbat. Mukhan are things that are allowed to be used and can be moved on Shabbat. Now we're going to discuss a very interesting idea over here, which is as follows.
But usually muktzeh is not even, there's no usage for Shabbat.
So that's muktzeh, maybe machmat isur, machmat kufa. There's different categories of muktzeh. The Art Scroll does a very good introduction, like 9 categories. It's unbelievable. It's a huge topic we're talking about now. But what comes out is like this. Listen to the case we're going to have here in the Mishnah. And we're going to go through Rashi. He explains 2 different reasons why this would be asur. Perhaps. You have a candle burning on Shabbat, and there's oil dripping out of the candle. Okay? So you want to take a cup, put it next to the candle on Shabbat, and catch the oil that's dripping. It's asur. You're not allowed to do that. Oh. You're not allowed to put a cup to catch the oil dripping out of your candle. Now, there's 2 reasons.
During Shabbat.
On Shabbat.
Before Shabbat mutar, after Shabbat.
Before Shabbat we're going to see is mutar. On Shabbat, if the oil's you're not allowed to put a cup there. Now think about it for a second. Are you allowed to move a cup on Shabbat?
Okay.
Of course you're allowed to move. Of course you're allowed to move a cup. What? Oh, okay, good, very good. That's one of the reasons. Excellent. That's the second reason. We'll see. There's 2 reasons Rashi is going to explain. The cup is mutar. The cup is, you can use it for coffee. It's beautiful. Why would it be asur? You're not touching the oil. You're just putting it under so it catches the oil. What's the problem?
It's like psik resha, no? It's going to cause
מה זה
something.
פסיק רשע?
It's going to cause something else.
לא עשית איסור.
But it's going to lead to something else.
What's it
it's like
gonna...
מלאכת מחשבת.
Okay, so let's see. Rashi's going to tell us there's 2 reasons why this might be asur, which are both associated with muktzeh. That oil is muktzeh, by the way. Why is that oil muktzeh? The oil itself. Why is the oil? There's a series of reasons why it's muktzeh. First of all, it's considered huktzeh lemitzvato. It's designated for the mitzvah. Second of all, we know if you take oil out of that on Shabbat, that's
You like this one with a good scent or something.
If you take oil out of it, what's the problem? It's kibui, because you're diminishing the amount it will burn. So the oil is muktzeh. Okay. The cup is not muktzeh. So why would there be a problem then to put the cup that's mutar under the oil to catch it? We're going to go through Rashi in a minute. Yochai just said one of the reasons. What is it? Okay, so turn it.
שמת האצבע הזה ומושך למטה למעלה.
בעיגול הזה?
בצד ימין, למעלה. שים רגע את האצבע. לך לשם. שים אותה ותמשוך את זה. סווייפ לאט, דאון. קלטת?
No? See it? You got it? Okay, Matan, you want to go do it?
No.
כמה אתה רוצה?
לא יודע, חם או שרק לי?
I feel okay, I don't know.
לא כל כך.
Ay, 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 la, 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 la. I don't know how to use it either.
סמארט, אני לא יודע אם זה...
Ay, ay, ay. Okay, Muktzah, let's go, Chaveh, let's go.
אצבע.
Says the Mishnah, Ein notnin kli. Let's read the Mishnah, we'll go through Rashi in a minute. Ein notnin kli tachat haner lekabel bo et hashemen. On Shabbat, the oil's dripping from your light. You're not allowed to put a kli under the light in order to catch the oil. Ve'im lekabel et bo et hashemen. Ve'im natnua mi ba'od yom mutar. If you put it while it was still day, mazeh still day, Yom Shishi, before Shabbat, mutar. Now Tosfot doesn't like this girsa. I just want to tell you because Tosfot says, be'etzem, what is this mashma? Mutar is mashma lechatchilo b'diavad. Ve'im natnua mi ba'od yom mutar. Ve'im natnua mi ba'od yom mutar. If you wanted to say lechatchila, how would you say? No. So 1 second. If you wanted to say lechatchila,
אבל אם.
לא ואם, בלי האם.
You wouldn't say that ve'im natnua means if you did. It sounds like b'diavad.
לא, אבל אם נתנה
so
מבעוד יום.
Tosfot says really what it means to say is מבעוד יום notnin, meaning it's mutar lechatchila. Some of the mefarshim I saw say it's only b'diavad. Well, why is it b'diavad? Put it before on Friday to catch the oil. What would be the issue with that bichlal? You're putting the cup under the, what's the... Just because maybe if you put it then you might use that oil or move it on Shabbat, some issue like that, zera of some sort. But either way, Tosfot says lechatchila you could put it before Shabbat. Let's just finish the Mishnah. Ve'ene otin mimenu, but you can't enjoy that oil on Shabbat lefi sheino min hamuchan, because that oil is muktzeh. That's not oil that's prepared for use. That's oil that has some sort of a muktzeh associated. You're not allowed to use it. Now let's look at Rashi. See Rashi on the Mishnah, in notin b'Shabbat, kli tachat haner. Now pay attention, good. We're going to say 2 reasons here. We're going to focus more on the first reason for the rest of the day, which is how Rabba will understand Rav Chisda in the Gemara. Let's see. Kli tachat haner, lekabel bo shemen hamitaftef. To catch the dripping oil. Mishum de shemen muktzeh. Now again, why is shemen muktzeh? Again, we said because it's hooked to the mitzvato, because we're worried because you have to take out its kibui. There's all kinds of reasons why it's muktzeh. The shemen is muktzeh. The kasavar ein kli nital b'Shabbat, which by the way, that's muktzeh machmat isu, because since to use it would be isu to do kibui, but kitzu it's muktzeh. The kasavar, and the Tana of the Mishnah holds, ein kli nital b'Shabbat. You're not allowed to move a kli on Shabbat, a mutter kli, a cup, ela litzorech davar hanital, only for a permissible use. What does it mean? I'm allowed to move a cup for its use to drink a coffee. That's mutar. But to move a cup litzorech something that's muktzeh, i.e. the oil in this case, you're moving the cup litzorech muktzeh, that is not allowed. Ivantem? There's a rule. I'm allowed to move a cup litzorech gufa for itself for a permitted use. But to move a cup to service or to function for something that's not allowed, meaning i.e. to catch the oil of something that's muktzeh, I'm using it litzorech something a muktzeh, I'm not allowed to move that cup. So reason.
Are you allowed to open the door on Shabbat?
Yeah.
Okay, if there is a deer coming to your house, you're allowed to open the door and you're going to tzadim? No, but it's the same idea.
It's not exactly the same thing because here I'm not sure exactly. It's a little bit of it's different. But the point is, just
what's
to be clear,
the usage for?
To move the cup, which is a totally mukhan. This is permissible for me to drink coffee, no problem. Yeah, but I'm moving it litzorech something that's muktzeh. I'm not even allowed to move it. That's the problem. Number 1. Okay, number 1. Inami, and this is what Yochai was saying before. Kasavar, Tana of the Mishnah holds something else. Asur levatel kli me'echano. There's a rule that if something was permitted on Shabbat, it was mukhan, it was permitted, I'm not allowed to make it lose its status of mukhan, of usage. No? So what does it mean? It means over here, lo ashiv kli b'makom shelo yuchal od litlo. Now listen good to Rashi because this is a little bit unclear. I can't put a permitted vessel and change it from mukhan to not being allowed to be moved. Now, why is it not allowed?
You put kli.
Ani lo yachol letalter kli, and to change its status from being mukhan, usable, to being not usable. Now, why is it not usable? Dahave, what's the problem with that? It's like כקובע לו מקום. I'm establishing its place. ומחברו ביתית. It's like I'm cementing it to that place. ודמי למלאכה. And it is like a mlacha. What do you mean it's like a mlacha? So it means like this. When that oil goes into it, what's the halacha? Can I move that cup anymore? No, because the oil inside is muktzeh. Since I can't move it anymore, it's like, now listen to what I'm about to say, it's like boneh. Why like boneh? Because it's like I built it into the floor now, I established it, and therefore I can't move it anymore. Now Rashi elsewhere says, in this Masechta, in two different places, he says it's like soter, because it's like you destroyed its use. Beforehand you could move it, and now you can't move it. So the Rishonim deal with Rashi. But either way you learn in Rashi is it's boneh, it's soter. You're not allowed to establish it in a place that it can't be moved anymore. Either it's boneh or it's soter, because you're changing it from being usable to not being usable.
And the power of Chazal that tell you it's become muktzeh, you mamash like you
exactly.
stuck it to the...
It's like you cemented it in.
You can't touch it.
Exactly.
No, don't touch. Mamash כאילו שזה בריא.
It's boneh, exactly.
חזק.
So let's just go through. We have two reasons Rashi tells us. Reason number one is, you're not allowed to do this, is because you're bechlal not allowed to move a kli of heter, letzoech something that's asur.
There's nothing to do with metaken mana here. No, metaken mana it's metzaref.
Something else.
But
Something else.
we spoke about the plate. If you make a hole in the plate in order for you to use it in Shabbat, or if you just basically complete the plate.
Nolad.
The nolad.
Yeah.
This is the same inyan.
Nolad. It's not exactly
the same. Or they change the status of the cliff from
I don't think
to Mukhan.
I don't think this is necessarily a nolad issue. It's boneh the way Rashi is learning actually, or soter. But anyways, so b'kitzur we have two reasons. Reason number one is you're not allowed to move this cup that's mutar. Letzoech something that's not mutar. So if I'm moving it to catch the oil, which is muktzeh, it's asur. I'm not allowed to move it. Reason number two is if I would do that, now I can't move that cup anymore, and I'm not allowed to change it from its mukhan status, because that's considered a boneh. I can't move it anymore, and now that's a problem. Now, we're going to see today, we're going to focus more on the first reason. Okay? We'll see. So let's see the Gemara now. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says like this. And we're going to have Rav Chisda, and we're going to have two ways to understand Rav Chisda, which is Rabba, which we'll do today, and Rav Yosef, Bezat Hashem, we'll do next week. So Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says like this. Afa pi shamru, even though the halacha is ein notnin kli tachat tarnegolet, you're not allowed to put an egg under a hen lekabel beitzata. Okay, it's Shabbat, and a hen, which is the female chicken, it's laying eggs. The problem is it's sitting in a place that's slanted. So I'm worried if it lays midron, exactly. If it lays its egg, it's going to fall and break. I don't want it to break. So what I want to do is I want to set up a kli or a basket under it so it catches the egg when it lays the egg. That's what I want to do. So says Rav Chisda. What's that?
Balul, they sitting in the cage and
okay, exactly. But this is specifically a midron. It's a slant, and that's why it's it's going to break. So Rav Chisda says, "Afal pi shamu ein notnin kli tachat tarnegot lekabel beitzata." You're not allowed to do that. Aval kofeh alea kli shelo tishaber. But if it lays its egg and you're worried someone's going to step on it, you are allowed to cover it with a kli to protect it. So let's stop for a second. Rav Chisda says a chiluk. You're not allowed to put a vessel to catch the egg that's going to fall and break when it lays it. But if it laid an egg, you're allowed to cover it so people don't step on it.
Maybe the usage of the kli.
So immediately we have to say, what's the difference?
It's different.
Again, 1 second. Let's just take it back a second. It seems to be very similar. You're moving a kli, letzoech muktzeh. Why is Rav Chisda saying... One second. Why is Rav Chisda saying you're not allowed to set it up to catch the egg, but you are allowed to cover it after it lays? By the way, the egg itself, why is it muktzeh? It's nolad. It was born on Shabbat. But the question is, what's the chiluk between the two rulings of Rav Chisda? So Rabba is the first shita. He goes with the first pshat we quoted in Rashi.
Because you're taking muktzeh, you're taking a kli that's permissible to use, and you put inside the muktzeh, you mamash like you taking kli mechano.
Okay, so that's not what Rabba is going to say. Let's see. Rabba is going to say not like that. We're going to see.
What's the usage?
No, because we have two things. Either מבטל כלי מכנו או you קובע או סותר.
רגע, אבל מה הכלי שהוא משתמש?
לא, זה אותו סיבה.
זה אותו סיבה?
The first reason is you're not allowed to move a mutar vessel לצורך איסור.
אוקיי, זה אותו דבר. It's the same things.
So what's the difference then? According to that, what's the difference if you're going to put the basket to catch the egg?
Maybe it doesn't change the status of the
put
kli.
it over.
זה לא הדרך שמשתמשים בכלי לטיפול עובר.
What do you want to say? What do you want to say?
Maybe it doesn't change the status of the kli.
It does not.
It doesn't change the
זה לא
status of the
שינה.
kli.
Again, but why not? Why doesn't it change? Meaning, once it's, why not? Why not? What are you saying? And that's me like Rav Yosef, we'll get to next week, but let's see.
Because
Let's see it inside. Amar Rabba, says Rabba.
הכלי עובד ככה, הביצה נפלה פה, ברגע שנפלה הביצה, זה כמו מה שאומר בזה הראשון.
נכון, עם השמן.
הכלי הזה...
אבל מי אמר שזה אותו כלי של השמן?
לא, אותו כלי. זה לא משנה איזה כלי.
רגע, חבר'ה,
ברגע שאתה הופך את זה לביצה, השתמשת בכלי, אבל זה לא הדרך שימוש שלו.
my time, Rav Chisda. What's the reason of Chisda? This is Rabba. Rabba is going to explain Rav Chisda. What's the difference? So Kasava Rabba says Rav Chisda holds. Listen to this. Tarnegolet asuya lahatil beitzata ba'ashpa. Usually, the hens lay their eggs ba'ashpa, in the garbage. Okay, in the dumpster area. That's where they used to lay their eggs. The problem is when people walk through the dumpster area, they're not careful. They'll step on it. They'll step on it. Ve'ena asuya lahatil beitzata b'makom midron. However, they don't usually lay their eggs when there's a slope. They don't usually lay their eggs on a slant. That's not a common thing. Ve'hatzala metzuya hitiru. The Chachamim allowed you to do, when you're going to lose the egg, it's going to be a hefsid, it's going to be a loss of some sort. They allowed you to do hatzala on something that's common. Ve'hatzala sheina metzuya lo hitiru. But if it's not common, they didn't allow. What's the pshat Rabba saying? Rabba is saying that Rav Chisda understood in the Mishnah, what's the problem? The problem is to move something that's mutar letzorech something that's isur. Okay. So one second. However, in this case, that's why we understand you're not allowed to move it to catch the egg that the hen is about to lay, because the problem is you're moving the mutter basket, the permissible thing, letzorech something that's muktzeh. That's why he understood. So what's the difference then to cover it up? Says Rabba, the Chachamim were relaxed. They said you're allowed to move it, letzorech something that's asur, if it is a common situation. But if it's not a common situation, then you're not allowed to move the permissible thing, letzorech the thing that is asur. Now stop for a second. So we understand now in the case of the hen that usually it doesn't lay eggs on a slant, so you're not allowed to move it letzorech something that's nolad, that's asur. But in the case of the guard, it does lay eggs there, and you're going to lose the egg. Someone will step on it, so that's matzui. They relax the issue of muktzeh. You're allowed to move it to cover. Let's take it back to the Mishnah. But in the case of the Mishnah, how does he understand that back in the Mishnah? L'chaora, is it common or uncommon for the oil to drip and to put a kli there? Ze matzui, ze lo matzui?
It's לא מצוי.
Why is it lo matzui?
כי בן אדם שם את זה בכלי שהוא שלם, לא מטפטף.
Okay, I hear that. So Rashi learns the reason it's not matzui is because only a little bit of oil drips. People don't really care about that little bit of oil. Memela, since it's not matzui, they didn't relax the isser, and you're not allowed to put the cup underneath.
Yes.
So Tosfot explains a little bit differently. He says people usually put the cup underneath before Shabbat because they realize oil's going to drip. Yes. So if he didn't put it before Shabbat, that's not matzui. Usually they would have already done it. Memela, the fact that he didn't do it is already considered not matzui. You're not allowed to put it there on Shabbat. Either way you learn is that the case of our Mishnah we're going to say is you're not allowed to move the isur vessel, letzorech something, the mutar for letzorech the isur. In the case of the hens, you're not allowed to, be'etzim, you shouldn't be allowed to cover it either, but since it's matzui, the Chachamim said it's mutar, they relax the Yisur Muktzeh for that allowance.
I thought because you upside down.
Rav Yosef is saying, going to say it differently. We'll get to that next time.
So wait,
yeah.
Just because it is going to break.
Exactly, you're going to have a
זה מצוי שזה ייסבר
It's remind me the same situation.
No, but Matan, you understand, we're talking about Matan, you understand, we're talking about chumrot, we're talking about dinim de Rabbanan. So the Rabbanan who make the Yisur can also say ze lo asur. You understand? It's not like they're being mekil on the Yisur deoraita. What they're saying is, we say there's an Yisur called nolad, which is, right, that's going to be a problem. Nolad, you're not allowed to put the box over the nolad. We're not going to extend that when it's something that's matzui. They're being mekil on their own dinim. They're allowed to do that.
I don't get it. If it's matzui, it's mutar to put something.
If it's matzui, if it's a common situation, you're allowed to move a kli heter l'tzorech kli yisur.
Common situation is going to break, that people might step on it.
It's common that they lay eggs in the ashpa and then someone will step on it, exactly. But it's not common that they lay eggs on a midron. That's just not a common thing. In Mela, they weren't lenient in that case. Okay?
I got you.
Now, the Gemara is going to ask 5 questions against Rabba, which seem to show that this chiluk of matzui and not matzui is not a good chiluk. So let's start with the questions. Let's see, we have 10 minutes. Let's see if we can get through this today. It's not Hashem. Pretty easy Gemara, actually. Eiteve Abaye. So Abaye turned to Rabba, his Rebbe, his uncle, and he said, it can't be what you're saying. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. Did they not permit when it's hatzala that's not common? But I'll show you, there's a braita that says like this. The case is Nishbar alo chavit shel tevel b'rosh hagago. He has a barrel of tevel wine. What is tevel wine? It means wine that you did not take off trumot and maasrot. Now that is something that's asur on Shabbat, because you can't drink wine that you didn't have maasrot taken off, and you're not allowed to take off trumot and maasrot midirabanan on Shabbat. So that wine is considered asur. It's muktzeh. You're not allowed to drink that wine. So what happened in the Braita says if that barrel breaks, the rosh gago on the top of his roof, mevi kli u'miniach tachteh, you could bring a kli and put it under the barrel to catch the wine. Wait a second. The kli you're bringing is heter. The wine itself is muktzeh. Obviously, this is not matzoi. Barrels don't usually break. So you see, even for davar sheino matzoi, you're allowed to move a mutter vessel l'tzorech the isser. That's the proof. Very good proof.
Mevi kli u'miniach tachteh. Okay.
Oh. So the Gemara answers, no, that is matzoi. Why is that matzoi? Begul fichadeti. We're talking about new barrels, de shchichi de pakai, that commonly break. Apparently, when they would make barrels, the beginning of its use, it hadn't yet gotten hardened or gotten solid, and it was common for them to break. So since it was common for them to break, that's considered davar matzui. And since it's matzui, you're allowed to move the kli letzoech, the wine.
Something known that it might happen.
Exactly.
It's
common. Let's go to the next question. Eiteve, another question. Raita says, notnin kli, a similar idea. Notnin kli tachat haner lekabel nitzotzot. You have a wick on Shabbat and there's sparks coming out of it. So, now obviously this is not sakanat nefashot, because if it was, you could be mechalel deoraitot, no question. But we're talking about it's not pikuach nefesh. So you're allowed to put a kli under a candle to catch the sparks that are coming out of it. So the Gemara says again, sparks are not common, and you see you're allowed to put under the muktzah item the kli. So you see, even for not matzah, you're allowed to move the heter item. So the Gemara answers again, no. Sparks is common. Memela, since sparks are common, you're allowed to move it. Now there's a tosfot on this that's very important, because the way I explained it is, we said oil dripping out, the way Tosfot understood, is not common. Why is it not common? In the Mishnah, why is it not common?
Oil is burnt.
So he says because usually, Tosfot learned, because usually people would put the kos there before Shabbat. So it's not common that on Shabbat you're going to want to put a kos. So says Tosfot, however, let me just read the words. V'nitzotzot afal gav dekama b'samuch deshchichi lo shchichi kulei hai sheichoshu latet sham klimi ba'od yom. It's not so common that people would put a kos there before Shabbat. Sometimes it's common enough that it's shchiach, that the Rabbanan allow you to put a cup underneath, but it's not so common that they would expect you to do it before Shabbat. You hear that? So there's like a chiluk in a middle ground over here. It's not so common that you should have done it before Shabbat, but it is common enough that they allow you to do it on Shabbat. There's a middle ground here. Masha'enkin, the oil, says Tosfot, that's common enough that you should have done it before Shabbat, and therefore it's not considered shchiach.
It's only in case that there is start to flick.
Exactly.
There is a then you are...
Exactly.
It's going to cause fire?
Again, if it's sakanat nefashot, we're not talking. Talking about where it's not sakanat nefashot, but you're still allowed to put it to prevent damage, to prevent something else, but not sakana, obviously. That's not. The point is because it's not matzui. That's what we're saying. Let's go through the final 3 questions here. Mem Gimel Amud Aleph now. Another question. So you have over here a situation where there's a fire in your house on Shabbat. Let's say the wicks, but the problem is they're very close to the beams of the roof. So now you have a problem. Again, it can't be sakanat nefashot, but you're worried it's going to cause fire damage, some sort of an issue. So the Braita says, Kofin ka'ara laner, you're allowed to put a ka'ara. Now the Mefarshim speak out, this is ka'ara shel cheres, because if it was metal and it heats up the metal, that might be a havara issue actually. So it's cheres, which doesn't if it heats it up very hot, it could actually potentially be havara. It's an interesting thing. But let's just stick with that. So it's cheres, you're allowed to cover it, and the Mefarshim say it can't be that you're putting the cover over the fire that it'll do kibui, because that would be asur. So it has to be, you're covering the fire with enough airspace that it's not going to go out, but it'll also prevent it from damaging the roof. That's the point. So you are allowed to put ka'ara alaner to cover the candle, to block it from the roof, shelo yochaz bekora, that it shouldn't reach the beams of the roof. Now, the beams of the roof are muktzeh, and you're moving this ka'ara, this heter vessel, letzorech, the beams of the roof. So says the Gemara, you see you could move the mutter vessel for the isu. So the Gemara answers again, bebatei gechini deshchiach behudleika. We're talking about low roofs. So if it has low roofs, such a thing is very common. That's why you're allowed to move it. Again,
so because of
same
the beam
idea.
made of wood, so it might burn the wood.
That's the concern. But the point is, since it's shchiach, you're allowed to move it. Means the yesod of Rabba is still standing. Exactly. Let's continue. And this is a Mishnah later on Kufnun Aleph Mebed that says, cases like this, you have one of the roof beams broke, so it's starting to fall down. So what you want to do is you want to put something to just support it so it doesn't continue to break and fall into your house. So the Mishnah there says, "V'chein korah shenishbera." If you have a beam of the roof that broke, "Sumchin ota b'safsal u'va'avukot hamita." You're allowed to support it with a bench or with the sideboards of a bed. Meaning the point is you don't want it to fall further. You're not pushing it back into place. That would be a problem actually, maybe you're building. But you just want to support it so it doesn't fall anymore. So the Gemara says you can put a bench or sideboards of a bed so it doesn't fall more. Again, because you're just leaving it where it is. You're not pushing it back in. But the point is that you see you're moving something that's mutar, letzorach, something that's asur. So the Gemara answers again, b'kishur echareti. It's new beams of the roof. Davidi de Pakai, again, that those are things that tend to break. Similar to the chaviyot, exactly. Means is that if it's new, they tend to break. Mela, that's considered matsui. Final question. This is a Braita, notnin kli tachat hadelef b'Shabbat. So a person has a leak in his house on Shabbat. You're allowed to put a vessel to catch the water, so it shouldn't get dirty, etc. Now we're assuming the water is dirty water. So you're not drinking that water. It's not like water you can actually benefit from. And you see it's muktzeh water, and you're allowed to put a kli to catch it. So mameli, you see you can move a vessel, it's something muktzeh. So the Gemara answers, again, a new house that the roof tends to leak, and memela, this is davar matsui. Now Rabba, that's what we're going to finish off here. Bottom line is, Rabba's explaining Rav Chisda, what's the difference between putting the basket to catch the egg on midron versus is that be'etzem you're not allowed to move a kli letzorech something that's asur. That's a rule. The thing is, if it's matsui, the chachamim relaxed that issur, and they said it's mutar. The difference is, usually the eggs will be born, they'll be laid in the ashbo, people step on it, so it's mutar to cover. But on a midron, it's not the normal thing. That's why they didn't say it's mutar. And back in the Mishnah, the reason it's asur is because the oil dripping is not matsui. Why is it not matsui? So you said either it's because it's very little,
people don't care,
or Tosfot learns it's because people put the kos before Shabbat. So we're going to stop here. That's how Rabba understands. Now Rav Chisda is going to understand that. Sorry, Rav Yosef is going to understand. Rav Chisda is going like the second reason of the Mishnah. Is the other reason, which I believe we're going to see, is that he's mevatel the kli mehechano, which is a different way to understand. Rabba understands the issue is you're not allowed to move a kli that's mutar letzorach issur. Rav Yosef's going to understand it's the other issue we said in Rashi, which is. No, so Rabba made a chiluk between shchiach and not shchiach, but he understood that the basic issue is the taltel. Rav is going to say exact. That's Rav Yosef.
By the way, what he said about to put on top of the candles the piece of metal.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be so hot, זה מתלבן. זה מתחיל להתלבן ומוציא ניצוצות.
אוקיי.
כמו בפסח. עד שליבון, שמתחיל לצאת ספארק. זה למה הבהרה. I didn't understand why it's Amara to put the...
Chazak. Okay, Chav, we're stopping here at the top of Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. B'ezrat Hashem.
Shabbat Shalom.
Pick up next week. Shabbat Shalom. Hashem, it's a beautiful week.